That's enough of that jazz, Eddie. Come on now, hold it. Oh, Schmidt there. Have you ever had the vague suspicion that it's all psychosomatic? I mean, it's psychosomatic on a mankind basis. I mean, the whole bit. We walk around here, and all of mankind is suspected all along that something was going to come out of the clouds. He was going to get hit by a lightning bolt, that a great chasm would open in the earth, and we would all disappear. Well, of course, ever since I got back from England, which has been about a week ago now or so, ever since I got back from England, I have had a sense of total unreality. Because I've always felt somehow along the line that America was the bastion of unreality. And then I got to England, and I felt, honest to John, like they had opened the gates and I was now in Oz. I mean, I was just about to be given an audience with the great wizard himself, the humbug. and so now I don't know where it starts or where it stops or whether it is psychosomatic or not. I don't quite know. And I'm digesting it, you see. I think that all good travel writers or travel reporters must allow time. Time is a very important element, you know, in travel writing. Are you aware of that? It cooks in your mind. All the things and all the sights and the sounds and all the stuff that you've seen, like some giant pot of Swedish glögg or some beer or something, and it's cooking and it's fermenting, and eventually it will be ready to distribute as the vintage stuff. And I figure that in a couple of weeks I'll be ready to say something about England, which is very different from what you think it is. It's not at all the way it used to be. Of course, nothing else is. But we keep reporting it as if it were. We keep reporting England as England used to be maybe 50 years ago. You know, the guys with the white sideburns and the guardsmen's mustaches. We keep thinking in terms of beef eaters, palace guards, the Queen, Sir Alec Guinness, and all that jazz, which is about as outdated in England and as about non-existent in England as the English themselves continually report us as a nation who lives right cheek by jowl with the Iroquois Indian. Oh yeah, they still think that in many places. I talked to a girl in Scotland, and she said, "Where are you from?" "Where are you?" Or how did she say? She said, "Where are you from?" That's it, something like that. And I said, yeah, it's not easy for an Indiana to come up with a Scottish accent, but let me tell you, if you think that's hard, you ought to hear a Scottish person trying to come up with an Indiana accent. Wherever I went, people were trying to tell me or to imitate to me how Americans speak. And it would be good for a laugh here if I had a few of those tape recordings to play for you tonight. But sitting in the Scottish parlor, this girl asked me where I was from in the States. And I said, well, I'm living in New York. And she says, are you from New York? And I said, no, not exactly. I live there and I'm from New York, although I suppose I'm as much from New York as anybody in New York today. Depends on how you define New York. If you define it as a spirit, then I'm from New York. If you define it as living in a rotten little hovel on Grand Concourse with a crack over the sink and with the TV going on in the next room and the beer being cooled in the freezer, well, then I guess I'm not from New York. It depends on what you call New York. You see, of course, this was totally confusing to her by this point because most people living outside of the country have a peculiar idea about what New York itself is. New York is like a giant movie set. And this is true of people who live in Indianapolis, actually, too. Come to think of it, they don't really they really can't conceive of people living in New York, actually walking around scratching and getting a toothache and having a bad knee and yelling and the whole scene. Living in New York. My mother, as a matter of fact, not more than 6 months ago, she looked around. I've got an apartment. She says, it's amazing. I said, what's amazing, Ma? She said, what's amazing that there's a place like this in New York? I said, what do you mean, Ma? This is an apartment. She said, yes, it's amazing. There it is. I don't know what she thought people did at night in New York, hung themselves on hooks, like bats, whether they were frozen for the next day when the show would start all over again and the sets would be rolled out and they'd turn on the music and the rain and the sunset and Richard Rodgers would start writing background music for it. I don't know. But I'm sitting there with this girl in a Scottish parlor, and she says to me, where are you from? And I said, well, actually, I'm from Indiana. There was a long, pregnant pause. And I said, have you ever heard of it? She said, well, yes, I've heard of it. And I said, well, that's where I'm from. And she said, are there many Indians there yet? Are there many Indians? Well, I thought I ought to tell her about the Cleveland Indians. Maybe that's about as close to an Indian I ever got when I was a kid. I remember one time they used to come out there and play at Comiskey Park, and they were the Indians. They had a big Indian. You remember the Indian they had on the front of their jersey? Big nose, big Indian. I remember Robert Feller always pitching with the Indian. I thought I ought to tell her about Bobby Feller and Hank Greenberg, two famous Indians. But, I don't think the humor would go over so good in Dundee. Lay there like a great big fat old watermelon rind. But it's very difficult for an American to explain to a Britisher that America isn't at all like he thinks it is. Because there must be at least 500 Britishers who work in America today, sending back reports, interpreting America to the Britishers. And you never read more hogwash in your life than that stuff that comes out of these guys that come from Britain writing about America. It's fascinating. And yet they write so well, you see. And I guess because they write well and they have a graceful way with a sentence, they sound logical. They sound like they're making sense. And, of course, to a man who lives in Leeds or to a man who lives in Manchester and has never been any further away from Manchester or Leeds than to go maybe to Brighton, and maybe once on his honeymoon he went to Paris, it sounds very logical what this guy says about Indiana. Perfectly logical. What he says about New York is perfectly logical. And the thing that I recognize about being out of that strange, unreal world of England is that you're always trying to make, I guess what makes it unreal to a person who goes to a place like England is because we have been steeped in English lore, Americans. We study English history. Oh, sure, all of us take English history along the line. We study a language called English. We study English literature. In fact, many of us take courses in pure English literature that never touches on American lit, ranging all the way through Jane Austen, by way of all the great English classicists of the period, Samuel Johnson, Boswell, on up through Shakespeare to George Bernard Shaw, and this side of it even. And it is not very often that a man in England studies American literature. He really doesn't have much in the way of courses about this, and so he does not have much of a sense of reality about America. And yet most Americans really know, in a strange way, about England. They've read Evil and Waugh. They've read Shaw, and they've watched plays by Noel Coward. They have a feeling for England, and yet when they get over there, it isn't at all like those people have reported it to be. It's not at all that way. There is a giant underbelly, for example, of truly dynamic Slavism in England that just is never reported on. Oh boy, I'll tell you, it's just rampant. It's running, galloping, screaming, hollering, and fist-fighting its way through the byways and the streets of London like you wouldn't believe it. Have you ever been in an English dime store, for example? Well, an English dime store bears a certain relationship to an American dime store, in that they're both cheap, they're both abounding in plastic, but it's a matter of taste. The English dime store stuff has, if you think some of the stuff you see in the dime store down here, you know, the big orange leopards that are made out of plastic that you're supposed to put on top of your television set to remind you that there are other things in life with fangs other than Ben Casey or whatever it is. I don't know what kind of aesthetics that involves, but if you think that stuff is really slob stuff, you ought to see the kind of stuff they sell in England. It's incredible. The English taste of the lower middle class, the dime store crowd, I say roughly must be about in the year 1935 in its sophistication. Its belief in what is hip and what isn't, what is pretty and what isn't pretty. I never saw a bigger collection of really terrible-looking wax flowers in my life than I saw in an English dime store. And I don't mean artificial flowers, the fancy ones they're selling around here now. I mean wax flowers. You know, like wax apples and wax oranges, that kind of stuff. And they were buying them like they were going to go out of style tomorrow morning, which was probably true. They were buying them like mad. Big, great, terrible looking. Oh, they were awful. A collection of wax roses that were roughly the color of, well, it's peculiar. It's that kind of stuff, you know, that they used to make wax teeth out of when you were a kid, you know, that pink gum color. Well, if you can imagine a collection of roses made out of wax, that color, already covered with dust, and on sale, you've got a picture of a dime store in Britain. And this is a kind of a strange... and stores, let me tell you, there are stuff in store windows in England that you never would believe you'd see in store windows. And big magic displays of this kind of stuff. If the kids were in bed now, if the women and children had split, I'd tell you what kind of stuff they have in the middle window of a store, let's say right on the main stem, a big top drugstore. You wouldn't believe it. But there it is. There's people say, well, that's honesty. Well, I could say it's something else, too. There's a little more to it than that. But when you get back to America, it takes you a while to get attuned to the life here, because the creature, man, is extremely adaptable. I'm beginning to find that out, that within 20 minutes, you walk around in England, and you start finding yourself using an English accent and using things, English phrases. And not because you're doing a takeoff or you're trying to make with the English scene, it comes naturally out of you. The phone rings and you'll say, hold on a bit there. Hold on a bit, I found myself saying. Hold on a bit, or I'll give you a tinkle. I know a lot of people, if I ever said that here in America, I get belted in the eye. But nevertheless, these phrases are endemic. They fit the atmosphere. It all fits. It all works well and beautifully, and so you begin to do it. And then I found myself, and this is the nuttiest thing of all, I found myself seriously, Ed, discussing the various aesthetic points of Elvis Presley versus the Rolling Stones, as though it counted. I mean, really, and like these are things I never think of in America. You just don't get involved in. I don't know whether many adults in America are really hung up on Bill Haley and his Comets. I don't know many people who would break each other's neck to get a ticket to Bill Haley and his Comets' big show down at the Paramount. And yet, in England, this is a serious form of discussion, and you find yourself seriously comparing Bill Haley with Joey D and the Starlighters. And I think that it's this kind of dynamic, lower-class pop art attitude that runs through English life that you just don't find much of in American life outside of the kids. Do you know that some of the top television shows in Britain today, Ed, and you see them practically every night, big deals. Oh, everybody goes to the TV set like they're hypnotized. They wouldn't miss it. Practically every night there is a top giant show of rock and roll. And all the adults sit there and watch it. It's not a matter of just the kids screaming. Here are the adults, people with lorgnettes, and people walking around with lame evening gowns and guys in evening dress, and they just can't miss a show called The Top 10. And everyone stops, the party stops. I was in a place in England where there was a very formal party going on, And about 8 o'clock, everybody began to file into the study. The TV set was on there. It was buried in a bookshelf, tremendous bookshelf with all these leather-bound volumes of all the great English literature of the past. And this was in a famous English country home. And everyone filed in at about 8 o'clock, and I couldn't figure out what was up, what's going on. And so we said, the telly. We can't miss the telly tonight. I said, why? What's on? I figured maybe the Prime Minister is going to denounce the Queen or something big is going to happen. Because the way they acted as though they couldn't miss it. Everyone had to stop the party for this time, and we all went into this study. And people stood around with their martinis and their ancient scotch, and they were drinking tankards of ale, and everyone was dressed to the nines. And what were we watching coming out of that great bookshelf? We were watching a show called The Top 10. And it had some mealy-mouthed disc jockey who was all excited about it. And every one of these groups came on one after the other. They looked all exactly alike. And everyone was deeply involved in it. Now, an American audience of the same kind of people would be looking with some curiosity, and that's about it. They'd make some comments. But I could see that it was a very different scene there, that they were really involved in this thing. They were not slumming or looking down or anything else. This was really important. Speaking of the slum, this is WOR, AM at FM, and Ed, I presume you have a goodie there.
Welcome aboard, sir.
Who is the ale man?
Your stateroom is ready, sir.
He could be you, a man with a thirst for a manlier brew.
The captain would like you to dine with him.
3 out of 4 men every time choose the bolder, keener tasting ale.
Can I get you anything, sir?
Ballantine.
You thirst for adventure, for something new. You try a Ballantine ale. This one's different. Bolder, keener, more to the point. Suddenly, you're a confirmed Ballantine ale man. Welcome aboard, ale man.
Who is the ale man? He could be you, a man with a thirst for a manlier brew. 3 out of 4 men every time choose the bolder, keener tasting ale. Ballantine.
Well, the tourist, are you interested in any more talk about Britain at all? Well, one thing that has amazed the Britishers is this sudden, almost maniacal interest that America is showing in anything British. As you know, the British have practically taken over the American theater. Practically every second play is either written by a Britisher or stars a Britisher. Dozens of British actors have recently become really big deals in the American movie, ranging all the way from Peter Sellers upward and downward. The pop music world now today is all out of its skull about the Beatles, the Rolling Stones, and all these different groups. Almost anything British today is enough to cause Americans to quiver like jelly, man, inside. And if you just say it's fresh over from England, they really want to hear about it, and they want to know about it, and they want to feel it and taste it and look at it and touch it and marvel at it. And this amazes the Britishers. It really does. Many of the Britishers I talked to couldn't quite believe that this was so. And, of course, many of them said the obvious thing was that many of them pointed out that so often the performers who were hailed as great British performers here in America were actually second-rate performers from England. They were guys who couldn't make it, literally couldn't make it in England, and they were fantastic big deals over here in America, primarily because of this Anglophile quality that so many of us have. That anything that's British is great. I wonder how many of you know that in England the Beatles are not the top group. Now, that may sound sacrilegious, but it is true. And in England, there are several groups now that are much bigger than the Beatles. They're on their way up, whereas the Beatles are on their way down, and have been for some time, that the Beatles are definitely not the number one big deal. And, of course, over in America, everybody is shocked when he hears this. He can't quite believe it, because it is quite true. In America, the Beatles are the big thing, literally. They are, no question about it. But then it's hard to tell a Britisher, on the other hand, that Elvis Presley is not the right hand of God in America. He can't believe this. He just cannot believe. In fact, I had one Britisher telling me, we were talking about American culture and American stars. He says, of course, he said, you take all the big American stars, really big ones. He said, I'm sure that we share alike in all the big things. He said, I'm sure that everybody enjoys Elvis Presley. And I said, no. I mean, it was very hard for him to understand that Elvis Presley movies play over in little 42nd Street houses over here to kids, largely. And that nobody waits around shifting from foot to foot nervously, waiting for the next Elvis Presley movie to come out. In England, they do. Which means that on certain levels, things which have ceased to be a really operating part of the American entertainment scene still persist as big deals across the water. And we never seem to think that it could be the other way around, which it literally is in the cases of many of the groups and so on who are making it big over here. It's hard to believe. Let's take the Beatle movie. That we assume that the Beatle movie was a big deal everywhere. Well, it didn't. It didn't go in England. It laid large eggs, most places, in England. And in fact, the same Beatle movie closed in just 3 days in Paris. It opened and closed practically on the same day. It lasted 3 days there. And so no one can quite explain these manias that go through the various countries. Why, for example, I remember about, how long ago was it now? It was 1958, as a matter of fact, I'll tell you exactly. I reported on this phenomena from right over in the other studio. I did a show from a hotel in Kensington, not too far from Victoria Station, when one morning I heard this giant uproar outside my room, and I could hear people running back and forth, a tremendous crowd out in the streets, and I really thought something big had happened. And I looked out of the window and I saw this enormous crowd. They had roped off the streets. It was about 9 o'clock in the morning, and people were surging back and forth, thousands of them. And I went down to the desk clerk and asked him what it was, and he said, well, you mean you don't know? And I said, no. And he said, well, I can't understand that. You're an American. You should know this. And I said, well, what is it? What? I thought maybe the president was coming over. And he said, why, Bill Haley and his Comets are coming in. And everybody in London had taken the day off. I mean, I'm talking about adult people, to go see Bill Haley and his Comets. And I don't think Haley and his Comets at that point could draw flies in Newark. And yet, they thought this was the big thing in America, which made it bigger to them, of course. Just like we think the Beatles are the big thing now in England, so that makes it big to us. I don't know where the madness starts. Where will it stop? Where will it go? Who knows? One of the most, I suppose you can say that one of the most overwhelming feelings that you get when you're a person living in a country. Now, I don't mean as a tourist. A tourist goes to a country and he spends 3 or 4 days there, and he goes on a set pattern usually. He travels to the various monuments and so forth. He gets on the train or the plane and he goes to the next city and so forth. Now, he is definitely touring. He remains an American. He remains really his whole soul and spirit, and his eyes remain on the dock in New York, or they remain at the airfield in New York, from whence he came. And so as he sees things, he still remains what he is. However, if you take a man and you drop him in the middle of the life of another country, now I don't mean as an observer, just put him in the middle of a life, but of the kind of life that is really being lived and not talked about or observed, you will find that there is a strange series of psychological things overtake you. Now, for those of you who wonder what I was doing and how I happen to be in this situation, for the last couple of weeks, I traveled with and lived with the Beatles. And I mean lived with them. I didn't travel with them with notebook in hand as visiting journalist, as pressman. I was part of the Beatle party. The manager, myself, and there were only a few of us. There was myself, there was the guy that set up the stage for him every night. There was a guy who took care of costumes and equipment. There was the public relations man and me, that's it. All of us traveled together as one little group, and the Beatles, of course. And we went from city to city. We went to Exeter, we went to Bournemouth, we went to Leeds, we were in Manchester, we were in Dundee in Scotland. We were in Glasgow, Edinburgh, London. We played several suburban dates in London and so forth. And it was a series of one-nighters throughout the British Isles. Now, I lived with them, not as a visiting American journalist, but, you're part of the scene, that's all, running up and down the fire escapes, trying to get out when the crowds were there, and arguing with the theater manager about whether or not you can go in after the show starts and all that stuff. It was just, the part of the scene, living there, just like you'd be living and working with anybody. Well, I began to have a sort of floating, amoebic sense of no identity at all. Why? Well, because obviously I wasn't living as an American in a foreign country. Just as a tourist would. A tourist has his pocket full of American traveler checks, and he's got his Diners Club card, and he's taken from the airport to the hotel and so on. I was on an equal basis with the natives, and yet I couldn't resist or I suppose you might say erase the knowledge that I was not one of the natives. Even in spite of the fact that I was living as one. So you begin to lose your sense of identity on both sides. America becomes unreal to you. And so when I'm hearing about the election and I'm hearing about stuff back in America through the papers, once in a while I'd see an American paper. You don't buy the New York Times in places like Torquay, which is way on the south part of England on the coast. You just don't. If there may be 3 guys get the Times there in town, and they have special reasons for doing it. You don't go to the newsstand and find out what happened to Yogi Berra, whether Johnny Keane has taken the job or not. And if you do find out, it seems like you're getting information from Wonderland. Has no relationship to what's going on around you. And yet, what's going around you has no relationship to you. So you become kind of a free-floating, non-attached, totally uninvolved human being, and hence quite unhappy. I wonder how many of you realize how important involvement is. You only really know this when you're traveling alone as an American in a foreign country in a world that does not recognize you as a tourist and expects you to behave as one of them. Then you begin to have a genuine sense of being disenfranchised from all things around you. Reality, disenfranchised from society, from modes of behavior, and in fact, almost from the human race itself. It's curious how deeply ingrained into each one of us is a sense of being part of something which we don't even really recognize as existing. I'm curious, you take a bum living in a door someplace, living down in an alley somewhere off the Bowery. Does he feel a sense of being an American and involved with American life? I say yes. Even though he probably would be defined by people around him as being a cast-off or someone who's resigned and he's just sort of laying there in the doorway drinking Sneaky Pete and yelling, and that's about it. But yet you take him, that same bum, I'll guarantee you take that same bum and you drop him in Soho, or you drop him in a doorway down in Limehouse somewhere, and he would be profoundly uncomfortable, even though his life is physically the same. He's drinking Sneaky Pete, and he's lying there in his own juice, and his pants are torn, and the rain is beating down on him. You would think that he would not make it. It would make no difference. No, it does. As a matter of fact, this is an experiment that's been performed. That being a bum in England is not the same as being a bum in America. Not at all. There's a certain way to be a bum in England. It's very different from being a bum in America, even though they're both at the bottom of society. They're at the bottom of a different society, which makes the bottom different. If you skim off the bottom of a vat of beer, you're not going to get the same thing as skimming off the bottom of a vat of grape wine. They're both the bottom of a vat, and they're both alcoholic, but boy, are they different. And that's the sense you get in England everywhere, that no matter what you do, you go into a little diner and you sit down and you order fish and chips. Well, there is a sense about even the salt. The salt comes out different, Ed. Little things that you accept for granted. The salt, the pepper looks different. They use white pepper in England. You never quite get used to white pepper. The fish is fried a different way. They use a different kind of flour. Now, these are all physical things, but don't think for a minute they don't have any meaning. You drink a cup of coffee and it tastes different. The sugar is different. The water is different out of a water faucet. You'd think, well, you drink water, it's going to taste like water. No. It tastes like English water, which is thinner than American water. Everything is thinner. I don't know why it is. It's like it's diluted. It's curious, yeah. And you go into an English barber shop, and it's an English barber shop. You don't speak the same language. They don't cut their hair the same over there as they do here. And he looks at you, and there's that head with all those knobs sticking out. Well, they're not English knobs. They're American knobs. He doesn't quite know what to do with it, whether to cut your hair like a stevedore, which is shave it right up the back. The English have a way of cutting their hair real close, all the way up to the top. The English working man. The reason he does this is his haircut lasts longer. And so he just runs the clippers all the way up, and there's a little top knot on the top. That's about it. Well, you're liable to get that if you go in. On the other hand, there's another way of cutting English hair that closely resembles Audrey Hepburn. Now I don't know whether you need that either. So there's a problem of communication. And you feel, one thing you feel when you go in England, in most of the English places, you feel very big. Now, Americans don't recognize how big they are generally. They're big people. You stand around with the Beatles, and these are normal, these are not kids, by the way. Don't think for 1 minute that the Beatles are kids. The Beatles several of the Beatles are closer to 30 than they are 20. And they're grown-up people. They chew tobacco and they drink scotch. And they're 4 truck drivers who've made it. And yet they come up to about my clavicle. I mean, you feel like, you can hit them on the top of the head, one after the other. And they're Beatles. And their press agent, is a little guy, you want to pick him up on by the back of the collar like a paperweight, sit him down. And so when you go into a shoe store in England, you will find that your feet are different than an English foot. Are you aware of that? They're shaped differently. That English shoes are cut on a different shape than American shoes. Now, a lot of people would be surprised to hear that, but it is the God's honest truth. I talked to an English bootmaker, and he says we have to make our shoes a different way because the Americans have different kind of feet. We walk less than the English do, The English do a great deal of walking. Of course, this is a fact. The English walking shoes and all that, and they walk a great deal. You see, that's the one thing that surprises you when you get to England is the fantastic number of pedestrians. In America, of course, most of us ride all the time. We ride, or we get in the cab, or we get in the subway. So it makes our feet different. And the feet have a different shape. Of course, racially and everything else now, there are different strains running through America that just don't run through the English way of life. We don't often think about the English being racially different from us. And yet you walk down a street in Bournemouth, for example, or in Leeds or Exeter, and the faces look different from American faces. They have a different look in the eye. Their nose is different. There is a general difference about them that is almost impossible to describe, and yet it is very distinct and very cleanly and definitely there. You get used to what I suppose you can call it the composite face. Now, what is the composite face of America? You walk through Chicago, you walk through Indianapolis, you walk through New York City, and you walk up and down the village. Now, even in spite of the fact that you will see different racial and ethnic groups in America, they retain the look of Americans. There is a look in the eye that says he's an American. And so I will walk down McDougal Street or along Greenwich or up and down 6th Avenue or 8th Street or so forth and down in the village. And there's a lot of Italians in the village. I never have a feeling that I'm looking at an Italian. I'm looking at an American. Well, his name is Provolone or something, they'll say. The fact of the matter is, he is an American. He has an American look. You can see it in his eyes. Whatever it is, I don't know. You go to Italy, of course, you're looking at an Italian. And his look in the eye and the way he is, and all these things are different. He's an Italian. And so when you walk around England, you begin to have the real sense of not only are you a social foreign person, you're also a physical foreign person. You're physically foreign. Your body is different from theirs. Your diet has been different over the past 5,000 years. We have not lived on kippers in the morning. We've lived on other things. We've lived on wheatina, and we've lived on shredded wheat. We've lived on hamburgers and hot dogs and more milk than most Englishmen ever see in their lives. The average guy has drunk in pure gallonage in America. By the time he's 10, he's drunk as much milk as the average Englishman will drink in his entire lifetime. So that one of the things that hits you is the bad teeth in England. Everywhere you look, people will smile or they'll look at you, and their teeth have a strange, odd, grayish, discolored, misshapen quality about to them. They're littler, they're smaller, the English in general. And so when you walk around England, you have a sense of being a kind of, and it has nothing to do with you being taller or broader, it's just you're different. You know you're different. And you know that you look different. You know that the minute you walk into a store, everyone is aware that the American has come in. Girls look very different in England than they do in America. I think that the difference is even stronger among the women than it is among the men. I always had a feeling that the girls' eyes, for example, were closer together in England than they are here in America. And they had a tendency to be dumpier. They were kind of short and sort of squat. There was a squatness to English girls, which I was not used to. You know, we're used to the tall, willowy American girls. Well, that's unusual in England. And there's a sort of squatness, a kind of strange, scurrying mole-like quality to a lot of the English girls. And their hair hangs in odd ways. A great flowing bush that hangs down over their eyes. And you'll see this black haystack of a hair, and you'll see this little pointy nose sticking out of it, two little beady eyes. It's like these little creatures, you know, that they sell in stationery stores. These little furry creatures, these good luck creatures, or these evil creatures, or evil spell creatures. You've seen them. Well, that's the way many of the English girls look. Yeah, you know, I don't want to sound chauvinistic. I'm just reporting to you how it feels to walk around in that underbelly world of Britain. This is not, of course, you get among the aristocrat, the higher classes in England, and you get an entirely different set of circumstances. You feel it as though the English have bred themselves for thin, high bone structure, and Leslie Howard becomes the thing there. And you know, when you walk up and down through the streets of England, especially when you get outside of the major industrial urban centers like London and so on, when you get out in the country, you have a genuine feeling that there are still walking among us actual Neanderthal men. Now, I don't mean that in any sense derogatorily. I don't mean that in any sense to be I'm talking anthropologically. As a very definite lay anthropologist here, a guy who just goes around and looks at people's faces. And you walk around the streets of those smaller cities down around the coast, the Cornish coast and so on, and you see these great, craggy, fantastic faces. And you know that they have not been crossed by any other strain or nationality for countless, countless eons. And you'll see these huge faces, and you know that all you would have to do, or you'll see these faces with those strange receding chins and rapidly receding foreheads and great beetling brows, high, heavy cheekbones, big, wide faces. And you know that all you'd have to do would be to put a bearskin rug on one of these guys and give him a club, and he would be right at home in a cave with a Neanderthal man. That there has been very little change racially among them. And oh yes, they're all up and down the coast. You see these various great classical types, the Celts, you'll see them. You see those huge heads, and you know you're looking right at an ancient man. And you'll see the Saxons. You'll see the Angles. Yeah, you really will. You'll see the Visigoths. When you walk around out in the darkness in that England countryside, you'll come across them time after time after time. And you know they're distinctly part of an ancient world that bears little relationship to the Beatles. And yet, on the other hand, if you look carefully at the Beatles, you'll find at least one of them has the look of an earlier type of man. Which one am I talking about? Every time you look at him, you have a feeling that you're looking at a throwback. Physically and everything. No, not George at all. No. He looks a little like Shirley Temple. No. No. Ringo, sure. He has a distinct look of another type of man. Now, when I say type, I'm not talking about nationality. I'm talking about bone structure, anthropological species, another strain of man. And it's curious to walk around England and feel that we in America, you know that you have, of course, we're never given credit for it yet, that the American experiment that started around 1620 and thereabouts, that the American experiment has now finally, at long last, produced a nationality. It's produced a specific type of human being. Like you have the French, you have the English, you have the Dutch, you have the German. We now have the American. And he no longer is a composite of all those various races. He now is a distinct creature. And you can see it when you walk around America and you see those faces. Maybe it's that I know them, I don't know. But I'll tell you, you're really aware of it. You're definitely, distinctly aware of it when you walk around England. That America is now, it's on its own. And not only is it on its own, it is very different. We are subjected to the same racial distrust, the same racial prejudices as all races of differing qualities, bone-wise, structure-wise, social structure-wise, using an American phrase, have distrust. You know, the English are absolutely incredibly outspoken in their hatred for the French. You get in, and they make no bones about hatred. They just tell you just terrible things about it. And you realize that it goes back into sources so deep that an American can never understand it. Never possibly understand it. It goes back before the Battle of Agincourt. It goes all the way back 1,000 million years when one group of Neanderthal men glared at each other across the channel at another group of Neanderthal men on the other side. And it went all the way back to those days and will never change, never change. And you know that the feeling that a Britisher feels towards an American now is tempered by the fact that he's looking at a man who looks different from him, has his own national costume. We dress very differently, you know, from the English. You go into an English store, a male store, for example, an English shoe store, and they have little thin, tiny shoes with long, narrow points that come together in the points like little spikes. They look like Italian grandees shoes. They wear coats that pinch in tightly at the waist. The English costume is as distinct from the American costume as the Bavarian costume is from, let's say, the Dutch costume. And it's a very distinct nationality. And so you walk around the streets and you feel kind of like, American. You really know you're an American. Now, some people resent this. They get very irritated when they find out that they are an American. The hipper you are, the more you resent this. And the hipper you are, the more you deny it. And the more you deny it, the more American you become. It's one of those conundrums. You know, it's like the dog eating his own tail. Where is the digestive process going to begin? And so I met many a hippie right in the middle of London, looking out at me, trying to affect an English accent, trying to pretend that he's been swallowed up in the world of Soho, and he looks more like Pumpkin Seed Center, Iowa than he did when he lived in Pumpkin Seed Center, Iowa. And everybody around him knows it.